It was supposed to be a peaceful getaway. A young couple, excited and full of hope, packed up their camping gear and set off to Joshua Tree National Park for one last adventure before the birth of their first child. Mark and Emily Harper married. For 3 years, were known by their friends and family as quiet, down-to-earth people who loved nature and each other deeply. Emily was 8 months pregnant, and this trip was meant to be a final bonding moment before they stepped into the world of parenthood. But after that weekend in the desert, they were never seen again. The couple had been planning the trip for weeks. They told close friends, shared their itinerary, and even promised to return by Sunday evening. Mark, an amateur photographer, had planned to take photos of the desert sunrise. Emily had packed her journal to record thoughts about motherhood. Everything seemed normal, even joyful. But when Monday came and no one heard from them, concern turned quickly into fear. Friends tried calling. Family contacted the authorities. Eventually, a missing persons report was filed and a search began. At first, the case drew local attention. Rangers combed through the rugged terrain of Joshua Tree. Helicopters scanned the rocky hills and valleys, and volunteers walked miles through scorching heat and uneven trails. Their car was found parked near a popular trailhead. Inside were snacks, water bottles, and a folded map with a route circled in red ink. It looked like they had planned a short hike, nothing extreme. But the couple had simply disappeared without a trace, no footprints, no broken branches, no signs of struggle, nothing. Weeks turned into months. The investigation slowed down. Rumors spread. Some believed they had gotten lost and perished in the harsh desert environment. Others whispered darker theories: abduction, foul play, even desert cults. But with no evidence, no bodies, and no clear leads, the case quietly faded into the background, becoming just another mystery swallowed up by the unforgiving desert. Every now and then, a reporter would bring it up. A blog post here, a podcast mentioned there. But the Harpers remained missing, and their story stayed unsolved. That is, till 11 years later. A solo hiker named Travis was exploring an unmarked area miles off any established trail. He wasn't looking for trouble, just solitude, peace, and some open sky. But what he stumbled upon that day would reignite a mystery long forgotten and open up questions no one was prepared to answer. He had wandered deep into a narrow canyon, shielded by high rock walls and thick desert brush. It wasn't a place most hikers went, and it certainly wasn't on any map. That's when he saw it bones. Not scattered, but laid out in an eerie, undisturbed arrangement. And there was something else. Something so strange, it made his stomach turn and his heart race. Authorities were immediately called, and forensics teams returned to the same desert that had swallowed the Harpers over a decade ago. What they found stunned everyone. Skeletal. Remains of an adult man and woman, side by side, partially buried under layers of wind-blown sand. And between them, resting in what could only be described as a protective position, was a much smaller skeleton, clearly that of an unborn child. The way the bodies were positioned was unsettling, peaceful, yet deliberate. It was as if they had laid down together, waiting. But for what? DNA testing would take time, but everyone already suspected the truth. The missing couple had finally been found. But this discovery only raised more questions than it answered. What happened during that last hike? Why hadn't anyone found them sooner? And how did their remains end up in such a remote part of the desert, far from where they were supposed to be? Even more chilling were the strange details surrounding the site. Some investigators noted that there were no signs of animals disturbing the bones, a rarity in such open desert conditions. Others pointed out that the area had been searched during the original investigation, yet nothing had been found back. Then, had they been moved? Had someone returned to bury them after the fact? Or had something even more unexplainable occurred? Friends and family, long resigned to silence, were suddenly brought back into the spotlight. Old interviews resurfaced. Emotional statements from Emily's mother, who had always believed her daughter was still out there, were replayed on the news. Social media lit up with theories, wild speculation, and renewed interest in the Harper case. Everyone wanted to know the same thing: what really happened that weekend in Joshua Tree. Was it simply a tragic accident to people lost in the desert heat, unable to find their way back? Or was there something more to the story, something darker, hidden beneath the sands for over a decade? The desert, beautiful and vast, had held its secrets tightly for years. But now it was giving something back. A glimpse, clue, a horrifying whisper of the past. And just when it seemed like the mystery was finally solved, investigators uncovered one final, unexpected clue: a worn camera buried under a nearby rock, still intact despite the years. Inside was a memory card. What it contained would shock everyone. But that we'll get to in the next part, so stay with us, because this story is far from over. The discovery of the camera changed everything. The memory card inside had somehow survived 11 years of wind, heat, and dust. Investigators carefully extracted it, unsure whether it would still function after so much time in the elements. To everyone's surprise, the files were intact. Dozens of photos and a few short video clips gave a haunting glimpse into the Harpers' final days and possibly their final hours. The first few images were exactly what you'd expect: smiling. Selfies of Mark and Emily at their campsite. Emily holding her belly proudly, glowing in the golden desert sunlight. Mark laughing behind his camera, capturing the strange rock formations and sweeping landscapes. They looked happy, relaxed, completely unaware of the fate that was about to unfold. A clip showed Emily playfully narrating their walk through the park, calling it their baby moon adventure. Mark responded from behind the lens: "Just you, me, and a little one on the way. Nothing's gonna ruin this trip." But then, something shifted. The final set of photos felt different. Mark's framing became less focused. Shadows grew longer. The expressions on their faces changed from joy to uncertainty. In one image, Emily stood by a rock wall, squinting at something just out of frame. In the next, Mark appeared confused, pointing at the map in his hand. They were clearly lost. The last photo on the card was blurry, taken in haste. A tilted shot of jagged rocks, half-shadowed, with what looked like a figure in the background. But it was too distant to tell. Could it have just been a trick of light? Or was someone else there? That image would spark endless speculation. But to understand how they got to that moment, we need to go back before the camera. Before the final hike back to who Mark and Emily really were. Mark Harper was a freelance graphic designer known for his quiet nature and dry humor. He loved photography, especially landscapes. Emily was a school librarian who adored children's books and spent her weekends tending a small garden. The two met at a bookstore in San Diego, bonded over shared interests, and quickly became inseparable. Their love story wasn't dramatic. It was gentle, honest, and built on mutual respect. They'd always dreamed of raising their child surrounded by nature. That's why Joshua Tree felt like the perfect place for one last memory as just the two of them. They arrived at the national park on a Friday morning in late October. The weather was mild, the skies clear. They set up their tent at a small, quiet campground near the edges of the park, not too isolated, but far enough to enjoy privacy. Witnesses remembered them checking in, smiling, polite. The park ranger even said Emily had asked about the best trail for a short hike that wasn't too steep. Everything about their visit seemed normal, except one thing: a neighboring camper, who didn't come forward until years later, recalled hearing something strange that night. Around midnight, he thought he heard voices outside arguing. Then, silence. He assumed it was just another couple having a late-night conversation. But now, Looking back, he wasn't so sure. He also claimed to have seen a shadow pass between the tents around that same time. But shadows are tricky in the desert, and memory even more so the next day. Mark and Emily took what should have been a short hike and easy loop trail, according to the park map. But they never returned. And what happened after that still makes no sense. The trail they intended to follow was well marked. Other hikers passed through that same area and saw nothing unusual. Rescue dogs brought in during the search couldn't pick up a scent trail past a certain point. It was as if the couple had simply vanished into thin air. Investigators eventually considered the possibility that they may have gone off trail, either chasing a photo opportunity or looking for a private spot to rest. But no one could explain why they would stray so far, especially with Emily in the late stages of pregnancy. It just didn't add up. Adding another layer to the mystery was the journal found in Emily's backpack, discovered near the bodies. The last entry dated the day they went missing. Read, "We heard a sound." Not sure what it was. Mark says it's probably just the wind or an animal, but it didn't feel right. "I don't want to worry, but something feels off." That line haunted investigators and family members alike. What sound had she heard? And why did it feel so wrong? Local folklore soon found its way into the conversation. Joshua Tree is no stranger to strange stories. The park is filled with tales of disappearances, odd sightings, and unexplained lights in the night sky. Some locals believe there are areas within the park where compasses stop working and where hikers feel like they're being watched. Most dismiss these stories as desert myths. But in the case of the Harpers, people couldn't help but wonder, was there something else out there? Online forums lit up with theories. Some said the couple had accidentally discovered something they weren't supposed to see. Others pointed to old military testing sites hidden within the park, or even secret caves that locals claimed were never mapped. A few believed it was all connected to a string of other missing persons cases in the area, suggesting a pattern that authorities had failed to notice, or chose to ignore. But none of it was proven. The only concrete facts were the remains, the camera, and the journal. Everything else was questions, guesses, and shadows. As the investigation continued, detectives kept returning to the same point. How did two healthy adults with a clearly marked route end up so far from where they were supposed to be without any trace until 11 years later? And how did no one, not even seasoned search teams, find them back then when the area had supposedly been combed thoroughly? There was one more detail. Near the site where the bodies were found, there were signs of an old fire pit, long cold, almost hidden under the sand. Someone had been there, possibly with them, or after them. And then there was the figure in the photo. Blurry, indistinct, but undeniably present. Who or what was it? The mystery was only deepening. And the deeper it went, the more impossible it became to ignore the feeling that something was being missed. Something crucial. The desert had waited 11 years to give up its secret, but it wasn't finished yet. As investigators dug deeper into the rediscovered scene, the questions only grew more unsettling. The area where the bodies were found, so remote and rugged, was nearly inaccessible without straying far from marked trails. It didn't make sense. Even if Mark and Emily had gotten lost, how did they end up so deep into terrain that experienced hikers avoided? And why was there no trace of their gear, clothes, or supplies scattered around them? Everything was strangely contained, as if placed with care or deliberately hidden. Forensics estimated that the remains had been in that location for nearly the full 11 years. And yet, the level of preservation, especially of Emily's belongings and the memory card from the camera, was oddly high for the brutal desert environment. No signs of scavenging animals, no windborne sand erosion as expected. It was as if something or someone had protected the site, not naturally, but intentionally, as the lead detective reviewed case files from the original 2014 disappearance. A few inconsistencies jumped out. One search map showed a small zone marked Inaccessible Decline to Search, circled by the original team. That zone, it turned out, was shockingly close to where Travis the hiker had found the remains. Why was that area avoided back then? When questioned, former rangers involved in the early efforts either didn't remember or gave vague answers about unsafe footing or lack of resources. But something about their hesitation didn't sit right. Meanwhile, a Tethys Day hiker who found the remains was growing increasingly uneasy. At first, he was hailed as a hero. The more interviews he gave, the more people noticed subtle changes in his story. In one interview, he said he had wandered off trail by accident. In another, he claimed he was following an old rock formation he'd read about in a blog. A third version suggested he had a gut feeling to explore that canyon. None of the stories quite matched. And there was one thing he never mentioned in public: a strange sound he heard just before spotting the skeletons. A low hum, not like an animal, not like the wind, almost like a vibration. Travis told one ranger about it privately, but that conversation was never logged. The media, meanwhile, was turning the Harper's case into a national story. Documentaries started production. True crime channels dove into every scrap of information. Online forums flooded with theories. Some claimed it was a murder-suicide pact gone wrong. Others swore it was evidence of a government cover-up related to abandoned military tunnels under Joshua Tree. A few even believed the couple had vanished into another dimension and somehow returned years later lifeless but untouched. Back in San Diego, Emily's younger sister, Claire, was watching all of this unfold with a heavy heart. She had never stopped looking. Over the years, she kept a box of every flyer, newspaper clipping, and tip email about her sister's disappearance. She even visited the park every October, hoping to find something others had missed. When news broke that the remains were found, she returned once more, not just for closure, but to see the place herself. What she saw unsettled her. The location where Emily's body was found didn't match anything she remembered from the park's mapped areas. It was like a pocket of land that didn't belong out of time. Out of reach, Claire quietly asked investigators for access to Emily's recovered journal. They allowed her to read the final pages under supervision. One sentence, buried halfway. Through a paragraph, sent chills down her spine. We saw a man watching us from the ridge. He didn't wave, he didn't move, just stood there. That line had never been released to the public, and it raised a terrifying new question. Who was that man? Around the same time, a retired ranger named Al came forward with a story he'd kept quiet for over a decade. During the original search, he'd been part of a team sent into a nearby canyon. Deep inside, they'd found a strange rock structure natural in appearance, almost like an altar. It was surrounded by burnt-out torches and stones arranged in a spiral. He reported it to his superior, but was told to leave it alone. A few days later, that entire zone was marked as too dangerous to search. Al left the job soon after, disturbed by what he felt was a deliberate effort to bury the truth. Still, there was no physical evidence tying any of this together, just whispers. Hints, pieces that didn't quite fit. But the emotional weight of it, especially for the family, was unbearable. Claire began digging into historical reports of other disappearances in Joshua Tree. She found 3 cases from the late 1980s and 1990s that bore eerie similarities. Hikers vanishing in clear weather, belongings found neatly packed days later, vague reports of being watched. None of those cases had been solved either. Mark's old hard drive, recovered from his home after the case reopened, added yet another layer. Among his photography folders, he had saved dozens of strange rock formation images from anonymous blogs and forums, many marked with GPS coordinates. Most of them were located around Joshua Tree. It seemed he had a fascination with desert mysteries, though he never shared this side of himself with friends or family. Had he gone looking for something? Was it curiosity that led them off trail? That day, a new team of investigators was quietly brought in, experts in forensic geography, desert terrain analysis, and cold cases involving unusual disappearance patterns. They began cross-referencing Mark's coordinates with other known oddities in the region. Something was forming a pattern that hadn't been visible before. The sites marked on Mark's hard drive traced an odd arc around the location where the remains were found, almost like a boundary. But a boundary around what? The conflict was no longer just about two people vanishing in a national park. It had become a puzzle of time, silence, and secrets hidden in plain sight. The Harpers may have been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or perhaps they had discovered something no one was meant to find. Something that had waited deep in the desert, undisturbed for years. And then, just as investigators began preparing for a second sweep of the area, Travis, a hiker, went missing. His car was found at the same trailhead the Harpers had used. Inside, a journal. His final entry was scrawled in shaky handwriting. "I went back. I think I saw it. I don't. Think I'm supposed to leave? Whatever this is, it's not finished. Not yet." Claire stood at the edge of the canyon where her sister's body had been found, the dry wind tugging at her jacket and filling her ears with a low, humming silence. She hadn't spoken to anyone since arriving at the site that morning. She just stood there, staring at the same jagged ridge Emily had written about in her journal, the one where a figure had once stood, silent and unmoving. She kept hoping for a sign, something she'd feel in her bones, the way you sense someone watching you from a dark hallway. But the desert offered nothing, just stillness. The park was officially closed off again. Rangers had marked a wide perimeter around the area, but Claire had been allowed access because of her connection to the case. The investigators were now looking into what they quietly called anomalous factors surrounding not just the Harper case, but also Travis's recent disappearance. He'd vanished without a trace, no prints, no tracks, no messages. Just a journal with one last cryptic line. Some believed he'd staged it for attention. Others weren't so sure. The way he described what he saw, it was too similar to what had been whispered before. And now he was gone, just like the Harpers had been. Meanwhile, the forensic team had begun analyzing the boundary arc created by the GPS points Mark had saved years ago. It was no random curve. It formed an almost perfect circle, covering a section of the park that had historically been associated with failed signals, confused hikers, and wildlife behavior that didn't make sense. A former rescue coordinator privately called it the dead zone. Inside it, compasses spun wildly. Radios went silent. Even birds seemed to avoid nesting in the area. No official documentation about it existed, but local rangers and search and rescue veterans all knew about it. They just didn't talk about it. Claire pushed deeper into her sister's past, pulling old voicemails, emails, and even a few forgotten letters from a keepsake box Emily had left behind. That's when she found something strange, a postcard from an old friend named Jonah, dated months before the disappearance. It read, "If you ever go to Joshua Tree, be careful around the southeast basin. Don't follow the sounds. Stay on the trail. Seriously." Claire had never met Jonah. He wasn't mentioned in any of Emily's adult life, but she tracked him down through mutual connections. When she finally called, his voice cracked the moment he heard her name. Jonah admitted he had once camped in the same region years before Mark and Emily's trip and had a terrifying experience. He'd heard a sound in the middle of the night, something rhythmic, almost like breathing. When he stepped out of his tent, he saw what he described as a shape at the ridge outlined by starlight. "It wasn't human," he whispered. "Or if it was, it wasn't alive. He'd run, never returned, and refused to talk about it until now. Claire recorded the call and turned it over to investigators. It was the first time they had a consistent thread between unrelated events. The sound, the ridge, the feeling of being watched, and the sudden urge to leave. Despite these warnings, Claire felt pulled toward the center of the marked boundary, the heart of the dead zone. She needed answers, not just for Emily and Mark, but for herself. For 11 years, she'd carried this weight, but now it was more than just grief. It was something deeper. She could feel it pressing down on her shoulders, as if the desert itself wanted her to stay away, to forget. But she couldn't. At the same time, the investigative team had recovered more images from Mark's hard drive, ones initially corrupted. When enhanced, they showed symbols carved into rocks, subtle, almost hidden. Not modern graffiti, something older. Some believed it was indigenous, but when tribal historians were brought in, they couldn't identify the markings. These don't belong to our records, one elder said, and honestly, I don't think they belong here at all. Oh. The team grew more uneasy with each piece of evidence. This wasn't just about a couple getting lost. This was about something layered into the landscape, something that had gone unseen. Or purposely ignored for decades, maybe longer. Late one night, as Claire sat alone in a ranger outpost reviewing files, she noticed a blinking red light on the wall-mounted monitor. It was a movement sensor placed near the perimeter of the dead zone, just a precaution, they'd said, but now it was triggered. The timestamp matched exactly to the minute when Mark and Emily had last been heard from. In 2014, same date, same time, 11 years apart. She stared at the screen, heart pounding, unsure if it was coincidence or something trying to replay itself in the morning. She joined the Rangers and forensic team as they moved toward the inner circle. The equipment faltered, radios cut in and out. One drone lost signal and dropped from the sky mid-flight. And just before reaching a narrowing canyon passage, the lead technician froze. "We're getting interference," he said, voice low. "And something's moving out there." He pointed toward the ridge. No one saw it clearly, just a flicker of motion, but enough to make everyone go still. The team set up a base camp just outside the zone, but no one slept. That night, a low hum moved through the air so faint you could almost ignore it, if not for the way it made your chest tighten and your thoughts go foggy. Claire lay awake, staring at the rock ceiling of her tent, repeating her sister's journal line in her mind. "We saw a man watching us from the ridge. He didn't wave. He didn't move." Something was coming together. The timeline, the voices, the boundaries, the disappearances. But it was still just out of reach, like a name you can't quite remember. Whatever was hiding in Joshua Tree's shadows had been waiting patiently. And now, with Travis gone and the boundary broken again, it was stirring. The desert was holding its breath, and Claire was about to step into its center. Just before dawn, the wind shifted. Claire was still awake, sitting at the edge of the base camp, staring toward the ridge. The hum in the air had faded, but something else had taken its place. Strange stillness, too complete to feel natural. Even the insects had gone quiet. She stepped away from the others, following a narrow trail that curved along the rock face. The rising sun hadn't yet touched the canyon floor, and everything was painted in heavy shadows. As she walked deeper into the path, her boots crunching softly on the dry ground, she felt it again, that prickling weight between her shoulder blades. Like someone was watching. She stopped near a patch of broken stone and noticed something. Out of place, a small stack of carefully balanced rocks shaped into a spiral. Not random, not natural. Someone had made it. Kneeling beside it, she brushed away the sand and found a corner of weathered fabric caught beneath one of the stones. Her breath caught. It was the same color as the jacket Emily had worn in one of the last photos on the memory card. Claire turned to call for one of the rangers, but Froze half buried in the sand next to the spiral was a second camera. She picked it up slowly, her hands trembling. It was older than Mark's, an outdated model, scratched and dusty. She didn't recognize it. The casing was cracked, but the memory card slot was intact. When she brought it back to camp, the team immediately started reviewing the footage. The files weren't from 2014. They were dated 1993. And as the first video played, everyone fell silent. It showed a young couple laughing and hiking through a similar part of the park years before the Harpers had ever gone missing. Their names were unknown. Their disappearance had never made headlines. But in the final video clip, the woman stopped mid-sentence and looked directly into the camera. "Do you hear that?" she asked. The man turned, confused. Then the camera tilted, and a flash of movement appeared in the distance, something fast. Low to the ground, just for a split second. The video ended there. The couple had vanished. No records of them existed. But their last known location was within the same marked boundary. That was the second camera discovered in this area. 2 different decades. 2 different disappearances. One pattern. The team was rattled. The FBI liaison on site requested the case be escalated. Officially, it was still listed as a recovery operation. But unofficially, something else was unfolding, something no one could classify. Rangers combed through decades of park records, looking for missing persons cases that had quietly faded away. What they found was disturbing. At least 9 unexplained disappearances within a 5-mile radius of the same ridge, all logged as hikers lost due to heat or disorientation. No bodies recovered, no gear found. Just vanished. Claire demanded to go deeper into the circle. She felt certain there was a center someplace the strange energy was anchored to. The lead investigator resisted, but after pressure from higher-ups and growing public interest, they formed a small team to accompany her. As they moved forward, the land itself began to change. The trail narrowed into jagged outcroppings. The temperature dropped, despite the sun now hanging high overhead. Compasses pointed erratically. The humming returned low, subtle but steady. It was no longer just eerie. It felt directed. Then they reached it at the bottom of a shallow basin, surrounded by stone walls carved by time and wind. Stood a rock formation shaped like a crude arch, too symmetrical to be natural, yet too eroded to be recent. On one side, the same spiral markings seen in the recovered photos. On the other, faint symbols etched into the rock, possible to decipher, but haunting in their precision. And at the center of the arch, nothing but a patch of sand that seemed untouched. Not a footprint. Not a single sign of disturbance. As if the ground itself refused to accept anything new. As Claire stepped closer, the pressure in the air intensified. Her head began to throb. The sound grew louder, not in her ears, but in her chest, like it was coming from inside her own heartbeat. One of the team members suddenly collapsed, no injury, no warning. Just fell to the ground, unresponsive. They carried him back to camp, where he woke hours later with no memory of what happened. But he repeated one thing, over and over. We weren't supposed to go there. Meanwhile, back at headquarters, a technician reviewing the old files found something buried in the park's archives. A handwritten note attached to an incident report from 1972. It mentioned an unexplained anomaly near the southeast basin and advised future staff to refrain from prolonged exposure. The report was never followed up, and the original author's name had been redacted. No one could explain why it had been suppressed for so long. Claire, now more determined than ever, began to believe that Mark had known about all of this, or at least part of it. Maybe he had been chasing the mystery, thinking it was just another hiking legend to photograph. But what if they'd found something they couldn't explain? What if they'd entered the arch, or whatever it was, and never come back the same way? Then came the third shock. A ranger running a thermal scan of the ridge's east face reported movement heat signatures, multiple stationary at first, then vanishing. When the scan was reviewed, the shapes were roughly human-sized, but distorted, like the heat was flickering. There was no one visible to the naked eye. The equipment had glitched immediately afterward. Claire stood outside the tent that night, staring into the blackness beyond the camp lights. Every instinct told her not to go back to the arch. But another part of her, the part that needed closure, that needed to understand, was already stepping forward. Something had awakened, and whatever it wasn't finished yet. Claire returned to the arch before sunrise. The desert was unnaturally quiet, and the air was heavy with a stillness that seemed to hold its breath. She walked alone this time, no rangers, no team, just her and the questions that had haunted her for 11 years. She stopped at the edge of the shallow basin, the wind barely moving, and for a moment she almost turned back. But something, maybe memory, maybe something else, pushed her forward. She stepped beneath the arch. At first, nothing happened. The air around her felt colder, denser, like it had weight. Then the hum returned, not loud, but deep, vibrating in her bones. Her ears rang. Her knees weakened. And suddenly, she wasn't standing in the same place anymore. It was still desert, still rock and sand. But it was ... wrong. The sky was darker, tinted with a strange shade of red that didn't belong to dawn or dusk. The air was thicker. She turned, and the arch was still there behind her, but it looked older, crumbling, almost fossilized. Shadows shifted at the edge of her vision, never clear, never still. She wasn't alone. Then she saw them, Mark and Emily. They were standing just beyond a nearby rock outcrop. Faces pale, their eyes distant but focused. Emily's hands were on her belly, and Mark's arm was around her shoulder, just like the photo. They weren't ghosts. They looked real, but different. Like they didn't belong in time anymore. Claire ran toward them, calling their names. They didn't move, just stared. And then Emily spoke. "We waited," she whispered, "but we couldn't. Come back." Claire felt tears spill down her cheeks. She reached out, but before she could touch them, the shadow surged rising from the ground, tall and formless, blocking her view. Her breath caught in her throat. The hum turned into a roar. The ground shook. Then everything went black. When she woke, she was lying just outside the arch. The sun was high, and rangers were surrounding her, shouting her name. She was covered in dust, her heartbeat wild, the memory of the moment behind the arch already fading like a dream. But clenched in her hand was something that hadn't been there before: a small, sun-bleached baby shoe. The forensics team confirmed it wasn't from any known inventory collected at the Harper site. The material dated back at least a decade. The shoe matched the kind Emily had packed for their unborn child, something no one else could have known. That moment confirmed it for Claire. The Harpers hadn't just disappeared. They had been pulled into something bigger than the desert itself, something outside explanation. The strange field, the heat signatures, the sounds, even the old missing persons case, SIT, was all connected. To that space inside the arch, a place where time broke, where people slipped through. Authorities closed the park's southeast basin indefinitely, citing unstable terrain. The arch was declared unsafe and sealed off. But rumors spread fast. Hikers whispered about the vanishing spot, and despite warnings, some still tried to find it. Claire never returned. She kept the shoe in a glass case on her shelf, next to a photo of Mark and Emily, smiling with the sun at their backs. She never told anyone exactly what she saw, not even the full truth. Because part of her still wasn't sure if she'd imagined it, or if part of her had never actually come back. But 6 months later, an envelope arrived in the mail. It was unmarked. Inside was a single photo. It showed the arch, cracked and half buried in the sand. And standing beneath it, clear as day, was Travis, his eyes wide, one hand raised as if waving goodbye. Claire stared at the photo for a long time, barely blinking. Travis, the hiker who had first found Mark and Emily's remains and then disappeared himself, was clearly standing beneath the arch. The lighting in the image suggested it wasn't. His clothes looked the same as the day he vanished, but the arch behind him was more weathered, more broken. The photo itself had no markings, no date, no return address. Just a picture left like a quiet message. A reminder. She didn't know who sent it or how they got it. She didn't even show it to the authorities at first. Some part of her didn't want this to become another investigation, another file, another unanswered question in an already impossible story. It felt personal, like a final nudge from the desert itself. And in a strange way, it brought a kind of peace. Claire hadn't found answers in the way she expected. But she had seen something, felt something that changed the way she looked at everything. A few weeks later, the national park quietly closed off that entire section of land. The reason given to the public was environmental preservation, though. The rangers knew better. Too many things had happened there that couldn't be explained. Equipment failures, disappearances, unnatural readings. The arch was quietly buried under sand and stone, not destroyed, just covered, hidden again. And once it was gone from view, everything started to settle. No new disappearances, no strange signals. The humming stopped. Investigators wrapped up the Harper case as best they could. The official report stated that Mark and Emily likely got lost, succumbed to the elements, and were only found years later due to shifting terrain. The baby shoe wasn't mentioned. Neither was the second camera, and certainly not the arch. Those pieces were left in silence, shared only in private by those who had seen the truth up close. The families received closure, if not full understanding. The remains were laid to rest together, and a small memorial was set up near the trailhead. Where their car had been found all those years ago, Claire moved away from San Diego not long after. She bought a small cabin in the mountains, somewhere quiet, surrounded by trees. She still received letters from people who had followed the story, some sharing their own strange experiences in Joshua Tree, others offering condolences or just asking if she believed in what people were now calling the Arch Mystery. She didn't respond to most. What could she say? That yes, something was there. That the desert held a silence so deep it could take people and fold them into time itself. Some things are better left felt, not explained. As for Travis, no one ever found him. No remains, no gear, nothing. He simply joined a long list of names tied to that patch of land. Claire knew. The photo told her enough. He hadn't died. Not in the way people thought. He had crossed over, just like Mark and Emily had. And maybe, like them, he chose not to come back. The bigger mystery remained. What exactly was the arch? Some believed it was a natural phenomenon, like a magnetic field or time distortion zone. Others leaned toward spiritual theories, ancient energies, forgotten rituals, echoes of those who once lived in the land long before maps and borders. A few said it was just the desert playing tricks on fragile minds. But Claire, who had walked through it, who had seen her sister and felt that weight pressing down like invisible hands, knew one thing for sure: it was real. And it was powerful. Not evil, not good. Just waiting over time. The media attention faded. The story became a curiosity, a mystery passed around in documentaries and online videos. People loved the twists of old photos, the journal entries, the final image of Travis under the arch. Some tried to prove it all false. Others made maps, piecing together locations from GPS data and hiker logs, but none of them ever found the exact spot again. It was like the land had shifted, hiding it all over again. Like it only opened when it chose to dot. In interviews years later, Claire spoke about her sister with softness in her voice. Emily was calm, she once said. She believed in the quiet magic of things. I think maybe she wasn't afraid at the end. That clip was replayed over and over in retrospectives, often paired with photos of the young couple camping, smiling under a blue sky, unaware of what was ahead. The story of Mark and Emily Harper became more than a disappearance. It became a story about the unknown, about how nature still holds places we don't understand, and how sometimes the people who vanish in those places are never really gone. Their lives echo in footprints, half buried by time, in journals left behind, in photographs that shouldn't exist but do. They remind us that mystery still exists in the world, even in an age of satellites and science. And that's why people never stopped talking about them, even now. Hikers still visit Joshua Tree and ask about the Harpers. Rangers give a careful answer, pointing to the memorial plaque and telling the basics. But if you ask the older rangers, the ones who were there when the bones were found, they might give you a different look. A quiet pause, maybe even a warning to stay near the trails and not go out too far alone. Especially not near the Southeast Basin. Claire never returned to the desert after that final visit. No. But sometimes, late at night, she'd dream of it. The wind over the rocks, the sound that came from nowhere, the flash of her sister's face beneath that impossible sky. And always, the arch. Not broken, not gone, just waiting. Like it always had been. And in those dreams, she never felt fear. Just a strange peace, as if somewhere out there her sister was still walking. Not lost, not trapped, just somewhere else. With Mark beside her, forever part of the desert, forever part of the silence. And maybe, just maybe, not all goodbyes need to be final. Some simply become part of the story.